Welcome to the Social Justice War Room, the podcast where we look at social justice in fiction, reality, and everything in between. My guest today is another friend from the Fandom for All Orbit. He's one of the founders and co-hosts of I Freaking Love Comics channel. He's also recently launched with SJWR alum Dane Whitman a new podcast called the Beta Boys. Please welcome fellow Beta Robo Strange. How are you doing?
Beta. Yeah, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So I guess we're in a similar boat because we both have podcasts that are named after insults thrown around by the right.
That's right. Yeah.
And beta, of course, being beta male based on the proven flawed understanding of alpha males within wolf psychology that has never ever applied to human psychology even.
So that's right. Yeah, not only does animal hierarchy not apply to humans, including lobsters. But it was wrong. But that's how people are, right? Like the researcher who said that, this was the alpha wolf, quickly, I think in a pretty short time, realized that, oops, never mind. We were looking at the parents and tried to, let everybody know that there's a redaction, but the damage had been done. So,
well, the samples he studied were captive animals trying to create hierarchies amongst strangers within a confined space, which does sound like the internet.
Facts. That's a good a good point.
So one thing, was the Cuck children taken?
The Cuck children. No, but now we might have to change names. I will talk to Dane. No.
Well, it's one thing I have to give the right. They come up with a lot of funny sounding words, even though they mean absolutely terrible things. They have like a good mouthfeel. So it's hard for me to even say cuck without cracking up.
That's right. Yeah, it actually becomes a parody of itself, where it's like it starts off as them like really wanting to upset you, and it's kind of like, it reminds me of Let's Go Brandon, to where, I know people in real life that they'll say let's go Brandon, and then I'm like, what are you doing, dude? And like, see, you're mad. And I'm like, no, I'm not mad. You just sound ridiculous. Yeah, see, that's how I know you're mad. And whether it's calling somebody a cuck, which, by the way, no shaming kinks here. So, if you're a cuck, cool. For that to be an insult, it's just so cringe. The right can't meme. That's the problem.
Yeah. They can't argue rationally either, and to get sucked into that is what they want.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so thankfully, I Freaking Love Comics represents one of the positive spaces on the internet to talk about comics and other fandom-related things. You do it with two other hosts, Respawn and Judith Rad, and you've also gotten on a variety of guests, including interviews with some professionals in the industry.
Oh, yeah.
How did that all start?
So it started off just kind of by accident. I feel like, so Judah had already started a Facebook group with some other unrelated friends, and when he had talked to me about Facebook, I told him how I liked comic books, and he's like, "Oh, well, I got a Facebook I'm starting up." And when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." And then at that point, I don't think we had 50 people in that group. I think I came in and there was like maybe 20 something people. And then very quickly it was 50, then 80. And so like I was in there with him as an admin, and I told him, I said, dude, this could be something big. I don't know if you guys have heard of it's kind of chuddy right now, but there used to be this website called The Chive. And they have these various communities on Facebook and or within its own website. And you could be a gun lover or an animal lover or just like these different things. And when I saw that, how successful they were, I said, we could do this with comic books. Like, why don't we make a bunch of different Facebook groups? Because at the time it was just called I Freaking Love Marvel Comics. That was what the Facebook was called. I Freaking Love Marvel Comics. And I said, why don't we just make a page called I Freaking Love Comics and then put a bunch of Facebook groups underneath it as a nest to build up. Right now, combined, we probably have, 10, 15,000 followers on those groups.
Nice.
And so that's actually grown into something. We got the IFLC trademarked, and we have a website, and we've interviewed Kevin Eastman and lots of names. Every time I get to this point, I'm gonna start carrying around like a little card in my pocket where like, here's the names of people that you have interviewed, because when I get to it, Kevin Eastman comes into my mind, and then my brain just goes brr. But if anybody listening goes to I Freaking Love Comics and goes to the Creators Talk, I think many people would be surprised of the kind of names that are listed on there.
Yeah, obviously Eastman's in a class by himself, what with having co-created
Right.
the Ninja Turtles.
That's right. Yeah.
But you've also gotten several other great creators on there. I know there was an interview with Greg Pak. There was one with Ryan Parrott of the Power Rangers Boom comics that have been shockingly good. And
really good.
It's all, and what you guys do, you also seem to host like is it Thursdays or Fridays that you do a live stream that people can just come on?
Right now we're on Thursdays. So Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, we do a live show where it kind of gets I would say a little unorthodox, a little high energy on that one, where we just kind of like make sure that we just kind of unwind, right? What we wanted to do with the brand was, I don't want to say create like an opposite space as, some of the less savory, right-wing types, but definitely a safe space, if you will.
I think it becomes an opposite space based on simply how vile those other spaces get.
Right. Yeah. But I also, we have gotten back and forth with them, on Twitter. We've had some guests that the right wingers hate. And they, we've gotten doxxed and stuff like that. But we definitely didn't make a brand known for attacking Comicsgate, right? Or being like as combative. What we wanted was more of like a more positive atmosphere, but also pro-LGBT, POC, just kind of like understanding all the things that the right wingers hate. We embrace and understand to be value in our comic books. So that's I Freaking Love Comics.
Yeah, which also speaks to like a lot of what the right wingers hate, of course, is diversity.
Of course.
But that seems to have been how comics have, especially in the past 2 decades, evolved, that there is a lot more stuff that you can read. There's a lot more voices finding success within the field. There's obviously still problems on the industry side, but it feels like all the energy in the 90s was like superhero books, but now you guys bring up a lot of different things that come on from companies besides Marvel and DC and from different genres. When did you start noticing that kind of sea change in the American comics industry?
Well, let me tell you a little bit real quick about my comic book, my journey real quick. And here's why. And then I'm going to answer your question. You can see why it's a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe not what you expect. So I was super into comic books as a kid, like comic book nerd. I had an uncle who had over 1,000 comics in my grandma and grandpa's basement, and he would never let me touch them. And then he said, if you can get up to 200, I'll let you read them. I got to 200. I think I got there too fast. And he's like, well, when you get to 400, I'll let you read them, but I'm going to hold them. When you get to 400, I'll let you hold them yourself. And we kind of went along that line. And so through my teens, I'm collecting comic books, I'm reading comic books. But later, like probably my senior year, I kind of stopped reading comics so much. And then I joined the Air Force and I leave all my comics behind. And I think I'm doing this great sentimental moment, but I leave my comics to my little brother, who was at the time 10 or 11. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to leave the comic books here. I just want to let you know they're yours. That was kind of like my parting gift. While I am in basic training, my mom calls me in tears and tells me, your brother sold all your comics. So he's a kid. He wasn't really that into comics. Like, they're mine now. And so this is easy money. And from that point, I never really got back into comics. So this is like about 2000. I still kept my love for comics, and I would, was excited for the Spider-Man movies, and I would use the internet to like keep up on what's going on. Especially when the MCU picks up, I'm like starting to like get back into it. I'm picking up Marvel Unlimited. I'm catching up on a lot of stories. I'm watching channels like Comics Explained and Comicstorian to really just catch up. And it was in the height of my catch up that I actually met Judah Red. And he, when I told him, yeah, I read comics, I'm thinking like, I read comics on my phone and I keep up with the MCU, like ultra casual, right? And he's like, I read comics too. I'm like, no shit, right? This is like how we get to the talking about the Facebook group stuff. And then I go over to his house one day and I see his room that he has for comic books. And it's this little tiny bedroom, but it's wall-to-wall comics, just comics everywhere. And I'm like, oh, you read comics. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have a collection like this. And he's like, oh, well, you should, there's a comic store. So we go down to the comic store. And that was really like the start of this. This is before the pandemic. This has got to be like in 2019. And now, God, like my wife, I'm looking behind me, like I have shelves of my trades, and I have, at least 3 or 4 long boxes full of comics. Again, I haven't counted them up, but, and so your question, when did you see the change? Well, I think going out of the 90s through the 2000s, which by the way, I'm told I didn't miss much because this wasn't a great time for comic books and stories. Like when I come back into it, as I'm catching up and I'm reading through these old stories like Thor, Spider-Man, and even some of these indie, not indie, but DC, meaning like not main continuity, like Watchmen. I'm catching up on all these things. We're reading through Sandman. I'm like, there's definitely a vibe that I think was always present, but the problem isn't so much what has changed. It's that culturally, what I think the right sees is a shift from centering the people who have always been in power, whether that's being white or being straight or being neurotypical or whatever, right? It's just, this is the norm. And so you had these comic books in the 90s that focused on that, right, for the most part. And then when we go, hey, you can have those comics, but let's make comics for everyone else. It was a small zoom in, all right, a small sample of what was happening bigger picture across the country, where movies and TV shows and just conversations and your workplace in general is like, no, like, it's not just straight white dudes. Let's open this up. And then what that does is they lose the focus, they lose their power, and they start flipping out. And now those right-wing groups on comic books, those right-wing comic book groups that we were talking about earlier, that's how they arise, is that fear, is that anger, right? And so, I'm happy for it. I'm glad to see the shift. And anybody who thinks that you still can't have like badass like hyper masculinity, blood and gore, which by the way, I love too. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se. And you're not reading, Berserk, you're not reading like other badass comic books that are still out there, which I think has always been like the point, is like the comic books you love haven't gone anywhere. You're just mad that there's stuff with it, you know?
Well, it seems to me like not only are they bigoted, but they're incredibly basic in their tastes. Like it's
100%.
intentional limitation of what they're willing to read. And when you guys all come to share what you picked up in the week in at a comic store or on a digital storefront, you pull in a lot of different things that comics can do. And that's definitely a sign of a much healthier industry, because in the 90s, part of the collapse was that the industry catering only to collectors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying to put out stuff that appeal to speculators, and yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's still like an element of that in Marvel and DC, where the books have a lot of backstory to catch up on and tend to cross over a lot into each other. And whenever you talk about big two titles, often you have to speak in terms of catch up for what people have missed. And how much of that do you feel like is a bug, and how much of that is a feature of the big two in this day and age?
That's actually a really good question. I don't think I've actually thought about it in that way, because if you had asked me in a different way, I would say I wouldn't think about the feature part of it. It was like, yeah, this is what's hard and it's kind of overwhelming, and then you got to go back and you got to read. But one of the things, go ahead.
I'm just thinking, recently I uploaded an interview I had with Travis Hedgecoke, where they did a talk about Grant Morrison's X-Men, which was at the time a radical departure from the what they'd been doing, which was basically a bunch of Chris Claremont cover bands. Mm-hmm. And also something that was actually self-contained, which didn't stick, but it was clearly something drawing on a very vast history. It wasn't saying like none of the stuff you liked happened. It was just like synthesizing it into something where the past was more like addressed in broad strokes than as kind of like a sacred text to hold to.
Sure.
So, and eventually Morrison left under less than ideal circumstances, to say the least, and the books kind of shifted back towards crossovers. And Morrison's own work for DC has been in a similar vein, but it seems like with the characters now being household names, you can get away with a lot more, just assuming the reader already knows this from the MCU and the DCEU.
Right. Yeah, and that's one theme that we've actually gotten from all the people that we've interviewed is whether it's in talks in our interviews or just following them on social media through their Twitter. One thing that I know is probably a shared frustration amongst creators in the industry is the fans' expectation for this religious adherence to continuity, right? And it's like, look, just let me tell my story, right? Like, and then even big writers like Donny Cates have been kind of they get pretty cheeky online to where they're like, yep. They'll like quote tweet somebody like, hey, is this canon? And like, yep, it's canon. And also Spider-Man's favorite soda is Dr. Pepper, canon. Like everything's just canon. Like, and so they're like, what they want is for people to like just stop giving a crap. Like, just enjoy your story. But what I was gonna say earlier was, I think when you go back to to the Atlas Timely Comics era of Marvel, and you see the Human Torch, the original Human Torch, fighting the Submariner Namor, that's one of the first kind of comic book crossovers that we see. If not the first, if Judah Rad was here, he would know, and he would correct me which way or another. But yeah, it's that shared universe that I think is way different that is an appeal, right? And that's why for me personally, and I think everybody's different, for me personally, the shared universe aspect of like Marvel and DC and Valiant and some of these bigger brands is what draws me in the first place. It's why, I know there are people who's like, I don't really like big two. I like indie comics more, right? Because they're like these contained stories, these adventures you get to go on, and they're kind of written in the way of like a prose novel. And you start in the beginning, you close it, and you close it up, and you go, wow, that was great. Versus this escape, this escape into a world that I can go in, where I can pick up this title, and then I can go on travel to the other side of the world and pick up this title. I don't think one is better than the other, but that's a long way to answer your question of bug or feature. I think it's unavoidable when when the feature of your titles is the shared universe, and you've been around since 19 whatever. It's almost impossible to not have that sort of daunting this mountain of life to where it's like, hey, do you want to come into this story? Yeah, I'll try my best to build some jump on points for you. But if you're really interested, if you really want to know why Thor has his issues with his father, if you really want to know what's going on with his mother, and Loki and any of that stuff, then might I suggest going back to maybe 1980 or so? And then somebody goes, I don't want to go all the way back there. I'm good where I'm at. And you're like, okay. But yeah, I think it's equal parts bug and feature, and I don't think either one is avoidable.
Yeah, I think it was Walt Simonson said continuity is a great servant but a terrible master. And of course, this is one of the best writers and artists of Thor, who,
that's right,
when he showed up, instead of only Thor is worthy enough to lift Mjolnir, it was only Thor and this horse-faced alien I just brought in are worthy.
That's right.
That's
right.
Yeah. So with you did, of course, pivot from doing comic content to comic and political content with Dane and the Beta Boys.
Yep.
And one thing you've mentioned before is that you used to be much more right-wing than you currently are.
Yep.
So like, how does that influence where you are now and how you see not only the right, but also the left and the center?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up like very Christian, like very, very Christian. And I don't mean like culturally and Christmas and Easter go to church Christian. I mean like multiple times a week, and then youth service on Wednesdays, and just a lot of church. And then my dad, who surprisingly enough was less involved, like definitely, yep, God's real and listen to your mother and all that stuff, but he didn't really go to church. It was my mom who was like super into church. And I think when you kind of grow up in that, especially post Reagan, there's this thought process of that you are kind of indoctrinated with that says, if you're a Christian, you support the military, there is only one party for you. And by the way, now, and that socially, economically, everything, if you don't follow and if you're not in line with this party, you are, working against your self-interest. But worse than that, you're working in the interests of people who are against God, right? That's the indoctrination. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't really like give enough, I don't know what the word is. I have no love for chuds, but I think the word is like empathy a little bit. And when I say empathy, I don't mean in the way that's like, oh, poor guys. No, I mean like I spend a lot of my day saying fuck them, right? But at the back of my mind, it's kind of like watching. By the way, can I cuss on there, or will you bleep that?
Go ahead.
Apologize. Okay, good. All right. So I say that, but it's like if I watch a killer or something, right? Like, oh, this person's a killer. Like, oh, they've been caught. Now they're in prison for the rest of their life. And then there's some documentary done on this killer, and you find out that he had a horrendous childhood, right? A lot of horror movies are based off that trope, right? Like horrendous childhood. So you sit there and you go, no, you definitely belong to be locked up. You definitely deserve to be locked up. You definitely are a killer. But there's some empathy there based off of the trauma that they went through as a child. Like, I was like, damn, sucks. You know, who knows what you could have turned out if you didn't experience that, right? And that's how I look at a lot of chuds, to where it's like, when you're either not religious, if you're a-religious or atheist, like I am now, it's hard to really appreciate the ideas that have been hooked on your eternal salvation, like your absolute like burning in hell forever, right? Or seeing your grandma that you miss in heaven. Like it says, what it does is it puts you in a place where you cannot think outside of that box for fear of losing that. And then they teach you that, right? So it's almost like an abusive relationship type thing. And so that was me for a long time. And right around 2013, 2014, especially during the Republican primaries,
Right.
things start like breaking away and the curtain is removed. And so that's when I start shuffling left. And I really haven't stopped shuffling left. And I'm still to this day like deconstructing certain thought process that I've had. And just kind of, and now like it's funny, some of my old friends, you know, they're like, what? Like, I'm a card carrying DSA member. Like I'm still in the military because, you know, I'm gonna retire out of it and get my pension. I'm not gonna throw that away. But I definitely understand the problems with the military industrial complex, or am starting to anyway, you know, or, you know, the imperialist nature of, you know, Western world powers and things like that. But I think in that way, it was kind of like serendipitous when Dane hit me up and was like, "Hey, do you want to do politics?" Well, I've been yelling about politics since, you know, 2015-ish, 2016. And so yeah. I mean, if it's not comic books, it's gonna be politics. If it's not politics, it would be a show on atheism. But you know, just kind of like my thoughts on religion. But yeah, I would say right now those are probably my three biggest passions is you know, politics, religion, and, you know, like nerd stuff.
Well,
kind of jumping back into that.
You raise a really good point that we're all conditioned by the environment we grew up in and
Right.
influenced by the messages sent out. And I think this is also true of any side of the political spectrum, even though the rights become so super villainously horrible about it.
Right.
But
Right.
I noticed on the Beta Boys, you and Dane talk quite a bit about some problems within the left, and specifically like some of the more extreme fringes that openly idolize Russia and China.
Right.
So
Yeah.
do you think that kind of phenomenon where they make excuses for other empires that use the trappings of communism has to do with the same kind of environment that might produce chuds?
100%. 100%. That is another great point. So here is the issue. When it doesn't matter what the topic is, if you enter into that conversation or that thought space with some sort of fervor, some dogmatic fervor, you are going to be set up for failure. Like every time you're going to be set up for failure, because the world is too chaotic for anything to be black and white, right? And that's what dogma kind of tells you, is like, you're either right or you're wrong, and that's it, right? And it's like, what happens is you start off with the premise that Western imperialism is a source of evil, which true, right? You look at the destruction of the global South, you look at South America, you look at just look at anywhere the British Empire is touched, and then, future, European powers and American imperialism, bad. Okay, great. So then what happens at that point is you either move to help change the system, right? And I'm totally on board with espousing communism. I don't think I feel comfortable calling myself a communist, but I don't know if that's as much as me feeling I need to learn more about it. I'm comfortable calling myself a socialist, but I don't find anything. I don't look at a communist and think that's bad, right? So when you say, okay, so communism is good, imperialism is bad, therefore, anyone who is against Western imperialists are good, and that's it. You've entered into the dogma, right? Into the dogma problem, where it's like, okay, yeah, but what if there's somebody worse than or at least as bad as the entity who is not calling himself a Western imperialist? Well, that person then has to go, well, maybe there's nuance, or maybe there's a lesser evil here. But then what happens is the thought leaders in that community, and I don't even mean like on a level of like a priest or somebody who has any sort of threat, like even your community as a whole can be enough for you to like, okay, I don't want to be ostracized from this community, because there's a certain amount of pain that goes into that. So when they go, wait a minute, you're not on America's side, are you? You're not on Britain's side, are you? You know what I mean? UK. And so they have to do that. Oh, no. Okay, so then that means China's good, actually. Well, no, I don't know about China's good. I go, oh, you sound like an American imperialist right now. And so because there's no like ability to operate within nuance, then yeah, that's exactly right. Because I don't know how many times, me being in the military, me being a prior conservative, I am surrounded by old friends and family alike who cannot, for the life of them, not understand that communism and socialism are not bad words, right? Not in and of themselves. And in their communities, or in their, even their own, in their own minds, if I were to go, maybe I present a good argument to say, yeah, but this, right? And I've sat there and we talked about, the oppressed people and how capitalism exploits and wage theft and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so socialism, that sounds not bad, right? No, I can't. Because they have to go, communism equals USSR equals the enemy equals bad, right? And it's like I cannot. And so that's the same for chuds, right? You're not an SJW, are you? You're not a real anti-white racist, are you? Like, it's these like kind of things, and they kind of hook them onto like community acceptance and the sort of cognitive dissonance that comes from saying after years and years of being taught a thing. I was literally just talking to Dane about this the other day. We were talking about cognitive dissonance. I think there's some psychological words that have become like entered into our everyday lexicon, like triggered or whatever, right? But they actually are serious, real psychological terms, right? And cognitive dissonance is one of them, right? I was talking about how like when your brain perceives reality to be a certain way and these schemas are then undone, there's a certain of actual psychological distress that goes along with that, right? We see small amounts of it when you tell a child that Santa's not real. After 5, 6, 7 years of being told this magical creature is real. Like, hey, by the way, it's all been fake. That crying, that sadness, that hurt, that's cognitive dissonance, right? And the greater the effect, the greater the consequence, the stronger that feeling. I remember the day that I was like, yeah, I'm an atheist. And I won't bore you. I mean, we could do a whole nother show on how I became an atheist, but I will say that it took it was probably a few years deconstruction, kind of break away, chip, until one day I was like, I took a breath. I'm like, yeah, I don't believe any of it. And yeah. I cried.
It's understandable.
You know? So that's what that does to people. And that's what keeps people kind of in the dark when they're at the avoidance of that pain, right?
Yeah. But the challenge is that, like, people have these really deep-seated held beliefs, and it's so difficult and painful to admit failing within those beliefs that they'll tend to double down and get even more entrenched.
That's absolutely right.
But a lot of what the challenge is in our current system isn't in ideology, but like material forces, like the vastly unequal distribution of wealth. And that seems like, I think everyone on the left at least pays lip service to this. The trouble is in practice actually organizing around that. And I see you do a lot of compilations of like interbreadtube, the term for the leftist YouTube community, fights where they get into debates and they're arguing sometimes it's over policy, sometimes it just devolves into kind of who's the real left.
Right.
And in the end, I'm just wondering what to make of that, because I mean, yeah, everyone's saying like, oh, you should go outside and do real leftism, but A, gets harder and harder to go outside with the pandemic that's still going, and B, they haven't seemed to decide what real leftism means, not as a collective.
Yeah, 100%. Are you asking what my thoughts are on that?
Well, I'm wondering, like, what's the way out of this if the voices you hear, the thought leaders, are ultimately in kind of a house of mirrors of different information and conflicting paths, and where even amongst the left, the definitions of what basic terms mean, like if you believe in like dialectical materialism in the Marx style and how material differences matter, some might use that to say like, okay, then supporting Biden is good because he's preferable to Trump, and others would viciously argue against that.
Right. Honestly, I think there's a level of critical thinking that is going to be required of anybody who sincerely wants to be able to kind of make sure that they know the most true things as possible and the least amount of untrue things as possible. And I think once you realize how to spot logical fallacies and how to conduct, I won't say research, because I think that's an overused word. Most people are definitely not doing research, but research review. I think learning how to read a paper and how to judge sources is very important, because the fact of the matter is we do live in a country that does not have any real formal way to teach you any of this stuff. I can't remember what his name is right now. I think Robert Wolf, maybe Dr. Robert Wolf, Democratic Socialist, and he has a PhD in economics. And one of the things that he said that kind of like really stood out to me once was he's like, how much schooling he has in economics, and not one class taught him about socialism. Not one. Um, my son, he's in high school and he's going through economics, and just as a curiosity, I'm like, do they even like say the word socialist? Like even if it's in a negative way? Nope, doesn't exist. It's market terminology, and just everything's capitalism. And when you grow up in a world like that, you're kind of left to say, hey, if you understand something's wrong, right? If you've read a book or saw a TED Talk, podcast, whatever it is, that kind of like, wait a minute, I think something's wrong here. You literally are on your own to figure out and discern what is right. And that can be dangerous if you don't have the tools to actually make that journey. And so, the people you were talking about earlier, tankies, China's right, China's good, actually, Mao is good, Stalin's good, like these ridiculous kind of claims. I have to wonder how much of it is dogma, how much of it is just an avoidance of that, of what I was talking about earlier, cognitive dissonance, and how much of it is a lack of critical thinking on their part. And not to say that I'm the expert or have any of the answers. I think that's the kind of the brand Dane and I are building, is like, no, we're not coming here to give answers. We're just normal dudes who we're gonna digest this, and we're gonna navigate this with our community, because if you're looking to be taught, I don't think we're the ones for that. But still, you're still kind of left to be on your own for that. And I've actually struggled with that, because I'm a fan of hard sciences, and I think the softest science I've been into, my major is in psychology. Even a soft science like that still has certain rules and theorems that you're kind of operating within. Politics, like, it's so like, it's interesting. It's because I had a conversation with somebody about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I've read the book 100 Years War. I read this other book. I can't remember what it was called right now, but and then I've done articles and TED Talks and kind of ingesting this stuff. And then I get into this argument with a really good friend of mine who is on the left, but is pro-Israel. So that was a kind of shocking for me. And we go back and forth. And here was the frustrating part. No matter what book I brought up, no matter what fact I said here, it was received as, yeah, but did you read this book? And did you understand that fact, insert fact here, was actually a result of this? And it's like, sorry if you hear my dog in the background.
No worries.
But we'll use this pause. That was the frustrating part for me, was, okay, so I read these things and I'm like, well, is there e-publication? Is there a study I can go to? Is like, because if I want to check to see if a certain theory is correct or whatever, I can go into my school's, library, pull up papers, see if they're peer reviewed. For history, it's like, here's this book written by this historian, really good. Yeah, but here's this book that says that historian doesn't know what he's talking about, and here's how it really happened. I'm like, well, what the fuck? Like, I don't, like, how am I supposed to know, like, what is, so all you got to do, like, as if that's just super easy. But what I find is, what you are left with in these things that are not hard sciences, is not a 2 + 2 = 4 sort of deal, is make sure that you feel confident in IDing bullshit and IDing logical fallacies. Look at your sources, figure out how to identify certain languages that you're like, I think a good example is like Jordan Peterson. I've talked to people who are fans of Jordan Peterson, like coworkers, and they cannot identify the Gish Gallop and the and the kind of like the long, intelligent sounding sentences, but then you stop and you look at it and he didn't say anything at all. When you can identify something, what those kind of things, then that's when you can start really just kind of choosing where you want to sit. And I think that's kind of where we're at. I don't have any special hate for tankies. I do feel that, we're all on the left, so it's kind of like, okay, whatever. If you think Mao is good, whatever.
Extreme right-wing extremists are the ones who actually commit murders and hate crimes. So tankies are ultimately just at worst insufferable.
Right, exactly that. And that's why I'm like, but also I think it takes a level of what's the word? Arrogance. It takes a certain level of whatever word I'm trying to find right now to go, I have done the reading, and where I stand is where people should stand. And if you don't stand and have this perspective of mine, then you are the one who was wrong. I think we can do that once so if ideology is a spectrum, right? It's clear when red is blue, when red turns into blue or orange, right? We'll use orange. It's clear, here's the center of red and here's the center of orange. But there's 1,000 like gradients in between, or an infinite amount of gradients that will go like, well, where is the point that red becomes orange? I don't know. And I think as long as you're not orange, right? If you're not like sitting there with like Nazi regalia or saying the whatever 13 words, 14, whatever the fuck it is, like, okay, that's clear. Like we're not there. Enlightened centrism, I think, is also clear. We start both siding shit and libs embracing capitalism, but wanting increased social safety nets. Well, I think we're getting closer to into the murky area where I can go, yeah, you're starting to get into the spot where you're cool, I guess, but not really. And then we start getting to this other area where I think it's like, I've done reading to where like, because right now where I sit is like, I think I'm comfortable. I'm a democratic socialist. Okay. So then I like, and I read further, right? So what I do is I read everything and then I figure out where I stand. I don't read to find myself. I know who I am. I know where I am. And so then I start reading out and go, oh, this is, same thing with like content creators. Sometimes people will say, oh, I can tell you watch this person because, you let them, blah, blah, blah. They tell you what to think. I'm like, no, dumbass. I've watched all kinds of content creators. And then I'll watch that one and go, well, that's not for me. That dude's a racist. And maybe I'll watch Destiny for a little bit. And then I go, well, no, that's not for me. Or, maybe you watch Tim Pool, like, oh, he's saying so. Oh, no, never mind. And you kind of just keep doing that. I was watching Mike from PA for a while, actually. And then I just saw like, oh, no, never mind. And then I learned the word tanky later, and I realized why I didn't like Mike from PA. You know what I mean? It's not like I was taught to hate tankies, and now I don't really like. I used hate. I don't know why I said that. Now I don't like his content. It was the other way around. Like it matched where I was already, and I think people within that part of the spectrum that change off. What I was saying earlier is I've heard people say that democratic socialists are naive and you can't do reform and yet I'm like, well, maybe you can't, but I'm just not willing to fucking see millions die in revolution. So I don't know what to tell you, yeah. So that's
I think it ultimately would be best to just go under the consensus of like what helps the most people and hurts the least people.
That's it. And that's it. The continuum of harm. That is where I'm at for sure.
But that's unfortunately, when you bring in all the politics and on such a wide scale, it gets so difficult to determine that. Right. So like what kind of small steps do you think are good to start with?
Honestly, I think small. Okay, so check this out. I think small steps is to start understanding why this is the brackish water part. This is why I say libs are and it's this. I think small steps is to start reading, not theory, not trying to figure out like zoom in all the way, which, whether or not you're a Democratic Socialist, nothing like that. Just why capitalism is bad. Google that, why capitalism is bad. I think if like someone is new on the left, like I am or was, whatever, is to really start there. I think if I had really started there, I think I probably would have started moving left a lot sooner, because for me, it was more of a working in my self-interest with regard to race issues that kind of got me on that move left. But and my wife disagrees with me on this, but there's a school of thought that says that our problems are based off of white supremacy, and the classism that we experience is a byproduct of white supremacy. And I think it's the other way around. I think class warfare, capitalism is the problem, and then white supremacy is a byproduct of that, because the people who were able to be in power want to keep that power. And yeah, that would be my first step, is to kind of like just try to figure out why capitalism is bad, and then start getting into like the differences between socially beneficial policies and the Republicans who are against them. Not that Democrats are the good guys, because a lot of garbage that they do. Biden is expanding the anti-immigrant stuff that Trump started. Things are not good right now, but continuum of harm. When we look at supporting like social, like supporting the uplifting of social safety nets, that is something that, oddly enough, to anybody on the left, it's just like a no duh kind of thing. But oddly enough, when you're raised on the right, social safety nets just gets translated into free handouts. And when you have that kind of thought process, it's a little bit of work that you have to do to go, well, go look at the quality of life of people who have greater amounts of social mobility, right? And understand that anybody who responds to that with, yeah, but they pay a ton in taxes, you have to then realize that what you're saying at that point is the good of your community, like the deaths of people on the streets, dying in the alleyways, the people not being able to hold on after suffering through mental health problems because we don't have a solid system to take care of them. That is not worth the tax rates that you see in other countries like Norway, which has their own problems, but just as an example,
Yeah.
that was it for me right there. Like, as I started getting the race stuff and getting into that and ACAB, that was like my first one, right? And then as I started realizing, I'm like, yeah, like we should be taxing the rich more. And even if it meant taxing me more, like, why wouldn't I? Like, why would somebody not want to do that? You know what I mean? Like, how many trillions on trillions of dollars get poured into war, and nobody blinks an eye? And then it's not that people don't know, because you hear people like Bernie Sanders and AOC and people that have been saying it for the past 30, 40 years and beyond and what are they taught to do? Like, okay, oh, here we go, another anti-war, it's like, wait, no, are you not listening? Trillions. Like, you know how much each bomb costs? You know how much fuel costs for an aircraft? And we're not even talking about stuff that you can kind of like sell to the public. We're talking, Afghanistan, Iraq, whatever. You can try to twist that into something, right? I get it. But I mean, what about Lebanon? What about Syria? What about these other countries in Africa that come out after already done? Why does that not piss you off? And then when I talk about raising minimum wage or providing childcare. Like Manchin, that was one of the things, the problems he had with on that last bill for Build Better, was he didn't want the child care. And people were like, well, if you can't afford child care, that's not the government's job to take care of your child for you. And I'm not going to pay more taxes. You shouldn't have kids if you can't afford child care. I'm like, are you hearing yourself?
Yeah.
And level of like fucking like comical, like comic book levels of ghoulishness. You know, this is a joke Dana and I made last week. We were like, it's like if I took the fucking ghouls of today and I put them in a TV and I made them the evil CEO or something like that, and I just did exactly what Manchin did or me as fucking Republicans did, people would watch the movie and go, oh my God, this is so campy. This is not how, you know, you made such a comic book fucking villain type thing. I'm like, no, they're actually are like that. Like, fuck your kid. I'd rather spend trillions on war, you know.
Yes. The man literally named Manchin.
Right.
Yeah. So to wrap up, like, anything special forthcoming from either any of your channels that we can look forward to?
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see a change in the kind of content that comes out of I Freaking Love Comics. We definitely want to start putting out more content that is kind of like evergreen. If you want to, like, I'm working on a script right now to get everybody caught up on the Hulk, like what happened to him, where has he been, and where are we at, you know? And it'll be like, you know, 5-minute videos, 6-minute videos on catch ups like that. Respawn is doing a video on what is it? I think Batman. I think it might be Batman. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But if you guys follow us on IFL Comics, IFLC _Nuff_said.
Nice.
Yeah, that's our Twitter handle. Yeah, we'll make sure to keep up announcements. But as far as Beta Boys, yeah, well, I think we're just trying to get our feet under us, try to get ourselves a like what makes us different, right? We both have a certain style to us, and I really like what we're doing so far. I think we're gonna definitely grow and build a pretty awesome community. We already have one now. But I think it's going to get even better because, I don't know, we're fucking cool like that, I guess.
Great. Well, look forward to it. And I'm glad to be on the beta side of history.
Hell yeah. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the invite.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody. Robo Strange. Thank you.
Yeah.